Welcome to Agatha Christie She Watched, our spoiler-heavy look at the movie and TV adaptations of the mystery genre's greatest writer. I'm Bill Peschel of Peschel Press, publishers of the annotated novels of Agatha Christie, and today we're talking about oppressed women, exploited nations, stolen artifacts, and hot male archaeologists. It's Agatha and the Curse of Ishtar, the 2019 movie that gives an alternative history of Christie's meeting and courtship with her second husband, Max Mallowan. But first, let me introduce my partner in marriage as well as crime of the fictional kind, Teresa Peschel. Hello, Teresa.
Hi, Bill. I'm so pleased to be here talking with you about one of the great romance tropes, and Agatha Christie lived it, second chance at love. And that's what she got with Max Mallowan, second chance at love.
But as we found out with the first movie we saw, Agatha and the Truth of Murder, we should not take this as realistic in any way, shape, or form. And when they bent the truth in murder, in the Truth of Murder, they broke it up, packed it in a trunk, buried it deep
under the sands of Iraq.
Because boy, this really went overboard.
Yeah, you know a lot more about Leonard and Catherine Woolley. Some of the people that we saw were real. You know, obviously Agatha Christie is a real person. Max Mallowan is a real person. Leonard and Catherine Woolley were real archaeologists on digs out in the Middle East. Agatha knew them very well. Her two male publishers may have been real. They certainly acted like typical publishers.
Yeah, but I don't think they were.
But I don't know if they were
not Collins. That was her publisher at the time.
Yeah, I don't think they were the actual publishers of her books, but they certainly acted like publishers.
I can just start by giving just the précis of what the truth actually was, because this was after Agatha's divorce from Archie. She wanted to go somewhere, and she went to dinner with friends who had just come back from Iraq. She was going to go west, like the Caribbean. And instead, because they were so enthusiastic about it, she decided to head east. So she went east on the Orient Express, which, as you know, plays a role in her life, met Leonard and Catherine Woolley, and they were fans of her work, so they allowed her to stay, despite the fact that archaeologists usually had a lot of tourists passing through, and their assistant was a young Max Mallowan. He was like 24, 25, and Agatha was nearing 40 by this time, and they met, and after some adventures, they fell in love, and they got married and lived happily ever after. Now, that's the truth. Here, starting right from the beginning, where it's Agatha having dinner with Leonard and Catherine in London, and them inviting her out. And then after that, it was arriving at the site and finding this man in the tent, and she's calling out to him in this tent, in this archaeological site, nobody else around. Hello, hello. And it turns out he's been shot in the head, and that's Max.
Who was never shot and grazed in the head by anyone.
Right, but it allowed her to rescue him and take him to the hotel and call the doctor and,
bathe his fevered brow and, see, wow, he's so hot. He's so young. One of the things that I think they did do correctly that was actually true to life is she was older than Max. She was about 15 years older. Is that correct? 15 years older than Max. I have no doubt in my mind that Agatha knew all the jokes about older women pursuing hot young men. Older men have always pursued hot young women, but generally if they're rich and powerful, they get a pass. Older women pursuing hot young men don't quite get the same license to exploit. We have a word for it now. We call them cougars. I'm sure there was a word for it in Agatha's time, but I don't know the slang, but there had to have been, because this is as old as time.
And they were treated much more contemptuously than now.
But Agatha was the cougar chasing after her boy toy in this, this film. That's not what actually happened. I'm sure she saw Max and thought, wow, you were so hot. You were so young. You were so fresh. You were so smart. You were so calm. You were so everything that Archie isn't. And at the same time, you were so hot.
He pursued her, too.
And she felt reluctant because of the age difference. And she already knew that if he wanted to have children, it would be more difficult. And they never did. She had a miscarriage, I think, but they never had children. And part of it was because she was too old.
But what drew them together was her interest in his work, and he was patient, he was obviously competent, he was good-humored, and he saw the same features in her. he was interested in her very much, and he proposed to her, and she was rather startled. She didn't see herself that way. She wasn't really that interested in getting married again, at least according to her papers, her autobiography. The way they took it here is like she jumped his bones the first chance he got, and I am not kidding about that. He takes her down into the
dig, down into one of the tunnels in the dig, and
there was this locked room,
and she says, "Can we lock the door?" Well, yes, and she locks the door, and she flings herself upon him, a sheet-scorching encounter,
which ends in a couple of sticks of lit dynamite being tossed near them, and
and I did wonder where that dynamite came from, because we never actually get an explanation for who dropped off the dynamite or how they did it.
And how they got in there.
Yeah.
Well, we figure out there's a secret tunnel. There's a secret tunnel that leads into the artifacts room, because Max was shot in the head because he was investigating missing artifacts from the site, stolen artifacts, and this was a warning shot to him.
Yes.
So that's the rest of the story, is the hunt for the artifact thief.
I have always said that Agatha Christie novels seethe with passion under the surface. People are murdering other people because they want someone else, and this is the only way they can have everything that they want. Very few of the murders are because you're psychotic, and very few of the murders are because just mercenary gain. There's almost always a level of I want, not just I don't want to wait around for my inheritance. We know that Agatha was proposed to multiple times before she married Archie Christie, but she was also the kind of woman that she didn't talk about this sort of thing. The public letters, the public autobiography, the memoirs that people have written about those times, I mean, nobody talks about her being red hot, but private people don't put that on display.
There are some people who look better in public than in the pictures.
And she had the problem of she was apparently a very attractive young woman, but as she got older, she developed a resting bitch face. And as a person who has a resting bitch face, and I have actually had men come up and tell me that I should smile more, I just had that happen to me a couple of weeks ago at the library, it's very irritating because what you feel on the inside isn't reflected by your outer skin. You don't look young and hot and ravishing and look at my tits and look at my sway of my ass when I walk away from you, even though that's how you feel inside. But people see what they see, and what you see, particularly the pictures of Agatha Christie, is you see an old woman. But that isn't how she felt inside. We don't know from the pictures what she was like behind closed doors. She might have been the life of the party. Somebody who told fun stories, who was a really good listener, who was amusing, who was a good friend, and she didn't reveal confidences. None of that comes through in a stiff portrait of an old woman in her late 60s. You don't see any of that.
Now, this show also comes with a warning for adult material. And one thing we do know is that Leonard and Catherine Woolley had a hot sex life because she can hear them through the walls.
Those walls and every building that she was in must have been made of paper. Because you could hear every word. And at one and the same time, I have mixed feelings about this. Because first off, Leonard and Catherine Woolley didn't have that kind of red-hot, sheet-scorching relationship, as far as I know.
No, they didn't.
I think Catherine Woolley wasn't actually interested in sex at all.
Except to manipulate men, at least according to how Agatha describes her, and other people have described her that way. She was a minx. She liked stirring people up, particularly men, and she didn't put up with female rivals if they were as pretty as she was. And one reason why she liked Agatha was, first of all, she read Roger Ackroyd and loved it, so it was like,
she could fangirl. She was a fangirling.
But Agatha wasn't looking for a man, so she wasn't competition.
I suddenly see, and I can't remember if we talked about it at the time, but I'm thinking of Murder in Mesopotamia, when Lovely Louise was murdered, and Lovely Louise must have been based in part on Catherine Woolley, wasn't she?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh my God.
Yeah, twice we have these instances where Agatha is in her bed writing or something, and Leonard and Catherine are clearly going at it and it's only funny because
enthusiasm, and it's funny.
But it's funny because of the archaeological references. Ooh, I'm your object, inspect me, dust me off.
Ooh, raid me, Tomb Raider. Ooh. And they do it again in the great fancy palace that they're living in Iraq. And there's Agatha listening, through the walls, which are again paper thin. And in fact, in the morning, Max actually makes a joke about that. Oh yeah, they're mourning constitutional. He almost looks at his watch and says, yeah, they'll be done soon. Everybody knows. And like I said, I have mixed feelings about this because this is, of course, not Leonard and Catherine Woolley at all. But at the same time, it was really nice to see. This is an enormous rarity in Hollywood, whether you're talking about TVs or movies. And it seems to be true. The world around this is an enormous rarity where you see a couple, a married couple who have probably been married for a long time. They are not 22 anymore. They are obviously in their 40s and have been married for years. And they have a red hot sex life of the sort that dried up old sticks over the age of 30 are not supposed to have because you're no longer fresh and young and hot. Well, they're still having a great time and they're having a better time than you are.
But this goes to show you what we think of the story is that we're not invested in the case at all. It's all these side issues because there was it also starts out with the murder of a monkey that belonged to Catherine.
Oh yes, there are dead animals.
There is a hanging monkey here.
Yes, the monkey was poisoned and then hung. They find the monkey hanging, and Agatha works out that the monkey was poisoned. It was accidental poisoning. The monkey found the strychnine and drank some and then died, then was hung up to frighten the Woolleys.
But also to disguise the murder method.
It's so strange. This was a very strange movie. There were actually, as it turns out there, you end up with several murders because you have the murder of Patrick Mulholland, who is discovered supposedly bitten by a cobra in the caverns underneath the archaeological dig. And you think, yeah, sure, snakes down there, right. And then he is conveniently and rapidly cremated. You have the shooting of Max Mallowan. You have the hanging of Ella the monkey. You have Lucy, Sir Constance's wife. And Constance, even though it's a woman's name, is used as a man's name here. You have Lucy's death, and she's buried in the coffin in which Ella the monkey was buried. And then you have Marmaduke, Lord Ponsonby, also being exploded. So there's a lot of murder, and yet at the same time, the murder plot seems really secondary to the fact that this movie was surprisingly funny at times. We were laughing.
Especially in the beginning, because Agatha is trying to talk to the Iraqis. There was one case in which she's talking to a conductor, and the conductor is trying to figure out where she's going because she doesn't speak Farsi.
Probably.
And he doesn't speak English, and he finally divines that she's going to the archaeological dig, and you see in subtitles something along the lines of, so you've come to loot our country's treasures. And then later when she's talking to a clerk in the hotel trying to get a doctor, she's not saying anything but drawing pictures and
because she assumes that he doesn't speak English.
And at the same time he is speaking to her in English, and yet she's not understanding that. You speak English.
Yeah, but I will give her a pass on that one because she has just carried in Max Mallowan, a gunshot Mallowan, and she's very worked up and she needs to find a doctor right away, and she is so anxious and she's in a strange place and she's not paying attention to the fact that the clerk at the desk, who is obviously a foreigner, can speak English very well, thank you.
And then he calls out to someone in the hallway in Farsi, run, get a doctor, and tell him that this woman is a mute.
Because he assumes that she doesn't speak English.
Right.
Because he knows from looking at her that she speaks English.
You can look at her that she's English, but she's not speaking anything.
But she's not speaking any language at all.
So there's these moments that are funny.
Oh, there's a surprising number of funny moments in there when Catherine Woolley is giving the eulogy for Ella the monkey about how Jesus Christ said.
I had to write that down because she's distraught and she's saying, Jesus said, no one is good except for God. Jesus Christ never met my monkey. It's like out of Twin Peaks, you know?
And it was really funny. It was especially funny because Catherine Woolley is the only person who loved Ella the monkey, whereas every single person said, oh, that awful beast. They were not unhappy that the monkey was hung. And then there was a funeral service for the monkey, buried in a full-sized coffin. And then you get to see a little bit late, towards the end of the movie, the black and white border collie digs up Ella the monkey because she's on top of the coffin, which now contains Lucy, Sir Constance's wife. Bill and I actually had a conversation about that, about why you would do that. And the answer, of course, is it's very hard to dispose of a body. It's really, really hard to dispose of a body. You cannot leave bodies laying around because it excites people. At the same time, you can't just go ahead and dig a grave in the middle of the lawn because that attracts notice. So where is the best possible place to hide the body? Why, it's in the freshly dug grave for the monkey. But what doesn't make any sense, and there were a lot of things in this mystery plot that I thought were really poorly plotted. What doesn't make sense is you put Lucy in the coffin, you put dead Lucy in the coffin, or maybe still alive Lucy and dying of strychnine poisoning. It's hard to tell. But you put Lucy in the coffin, and then you put the monkey in the coffin with Lucy. You wedge the dead monkey in there, and then put the lid on and put the dirt back, and no one will ever know, because if you leave the monkey on top of the coffin, like you forgot, the dog will dig it up, and that's what happened.
Actually, had no problems with that because I was anticipating the questions and they anticipated my questions, so that actually worked out very well.
Oh, and that leads me to the title itself, The Curse of Ishtar. When you look at that, you think that this is obviously going to be something paranormal and woo-woo, cursed objects like King Tut's tomb. Not really. Not really.
It had nothing to do with it.
It had nothing to do with that.
Except for maybe an implication.
Yeah, the implication is the curse of oil. When Leonard Woolley read off the Curse of Ishtar in very free poetic translation on the spur of the moment, which was impressive, it demonstrated his mastery of the Sumerian language. And you get a little bit about, the poisonous, toxic blood of the earth will damage everything it touches, if I remember correctly. And of course, it turns out that money is involved and petroleum rights and where are you going to dig your oil wells.
Which is true at the time because I think it was like in the 1920s, Winston Churchill, as Admiral of the Navy, he was in charge of the Navy.
He already knew they had to move away from coal for the ships. He was pushing towards, I think, gas turbines.
Going from coal to oil, and he wanted to secure the reserves. One of the problems with coal is that Britain did not have native resources of coal.
Because they dug it all up and burned it.
But they had reserves of oil in the Middle East in some of the countries they controlled. So that is actually very true. That's very true to history. The only problem I had is that they were trying to say that they needed to dig through archaeological sites in order to reach the oil reserves.
Now, I don't know what oil technology was in 1928, 1929. It is possible that they still were having to drill straight down rather than drill sideways. I don't know. I do know that if you can go straight down, you are going to spend less time, less money, less resources, and you have a much better chance of making a direct hit. When oil is underground in big pools, it's not like you can stick a straw into you put a lid on a swimming pool and you can stick the straw in anywhere. Oil isn't like that. They're more broken up. So it kind of matters where you put the well, and I don't know how much it mattered in 1929. Maybe it mattered a lot with the technology of the time. I still think that they wouldn't have had to go right through the middle of a very important archaeological site. They could have been 100 yards off to the side, because most of these sites are really not that big.
And the drilling equipment is not that big either. And there's a number of these issues that crop up because we have obviously the Iraqis resenting the intrusion of
English archaeologists, especially because they could be selling those stolen antiquities themselves.
The black market themselves, which is what they were doing before the Brits came in and said, maybe we should put these in museums. And there's even an exchange with Ezekiel, who was the Iraqi official overseeing the dig, saying, I know Leonard is stealing antiquities. I know where he hides them. And Christie says, where? And Ezekiel says, the British Museum.
That's more of a modern take. At the time, it's really hard to say because I don't know what the first person narrative would be from an Iraqi citizen of the time. And it is perfectly possible. And I think it probably is likely that you would have had Iraqis at the time seeing their national treasures go off to museums in England, and it bothered them very much. Maybe because they wanted to sell them themselves. I don't know. But at the same time, if you aren't putting them in museums yourself, they are all going to end up being looted. Nobody leaves valuables in the ground if they can be dragged off and either sold or put into museums. One of those two fates is going to happen. The minute somebody sealed a tomb on some famous king, the tomb raiders were
They were just waiting there with their hourglass watches going, okay, any moment now.
Any minute now. Okay, as soon as the sun goes down and the guards leave, we're digging in from the far end and we're going to take all of the treasure. I think it's very rare that an archaeological site is discovered that hasn't been looted at least once soon after it was sealed.
And that was what was so special about the Tutankhamun site, is that it wasn't.
Yeah, it wasn't looted.
It wasn't looted at all. So that's what made it a wonderful piece of archaeology. I think I'm objecting more to how heavy-handed they were in beating us around the head with this.
When they could have been spending time on actually making the mystery a lot clearer, because a huge amount of this involved Agatha mysteriously knowing what was going on, not telling us or Max, who commented on it frequently. Yes. How do you know this? Well, she never said, and the script never said, and so we have no idea. And if it was Miss Marple doing the investigation, I would say that she pulled the solution out of her knitting bag. Agatha pulled the solution out of the sand around her. No idea how she knew all of these magical things, and all of this time wasted that could have been devoted to what could have been an interesting mystery. How did she know that Marmaduke was Sir Constance's wife Lucy's much younger lover? How did she know? Process of elimination, because there was only Max, there was Ezekiel, there was Leonard Woolley, who was fully occupied with Catherine.
Like that ever stopped a man.
Well, yes, and Marmaduke. It just didn't make sense. And there were other things that didn't make any sense, because when they're doing the autopsy on Ella the monkey after she has been hung, and Agatha immediately suspects poisoning, and this was actually a very logical thing, that the monkey was already dead when it was hung, because a monkey is going to bite and claw and fight, and you are going to end up scratched all to hell.
And the monkey will just climb up the rope.
And then the monkey will climb up the rope. The monkey, you are not going to be able to successfully hang a monkey. You are not going to be, not a live monkey that can fight back. You are not going to be able to do it. The monkey had to be dead before it was hung. What killed the monkey? If the monkey doesn't have an obvious stab or bullet wound, well, poisoning is the most likely answer. So you get this ridiculous scene where she is being squeamish about cutting open the monkey, and what does a liver look like? What does a kidney look out like? When she worked in the wards during World War I, and in her own autobiography, she mentions bringing soldiers' limbs to the incinerary. And I can't believe that she would get squeamish about cutting open a monkey to extract the liver in order to conduct scientific experiments on it.
Which she does in the end.
Which she does in the end anyway.
They did it first because it was a funny moment with Max, and then she ends up doing it after Max, of course, is throwing up out the window.
Her autopsying the monkey and doing the scientific experiments, absolutely. But her getting squeamish about it first, no, I couldn't buy that. And then you never get a clear explanation of why the monkey took strychnine. And my thought was, of course, to Indiana Jones. You see the bad monkey, and they're at, I can't remember what Indies. Yeah, they were in Cairo, and the monkey eats dates, and the monkey eats poisoned dates, and that's what kills the monkey. Well, why would Ella the monkey die? The monkeys do not open little bottles of poison, take the cork out, drink some of the poison, and put the cork back. They aren't going to do that. Nor are they going to lap the poison up out of a saucer, because it's bitter. Basically, you have to have poison fruit or something that the monkey is going to eat on its own. And that didn't make any sense to me. Why would you hang the monkey other than to upset people? The same thing with throwing in the dynamite onto Max and Agatha so that you can interrupt them before they can really get going and consummate their relationship after only knowing each other for 3 days. That was never explained. There was so much in this movie that was never explained. Agatha just pulled the solution out of the sand.
And there was other posturing as well, because we haven't even gone into the character of Pearl Thoreau, a black archaeologist woman, and she was supposed to come out to be companion?
A companion and assistant.
An assistant to Catherine.
And she ends up being
replaced by the monkey.
The monkey is the companion, and she's basically the dog's body. As a young black woman in an English archaeological dig, no matter how well connected she is or how intelligent she is, all they're going to see is young black woman, and that means maid.
Except they would have had this clarified before she got out as far as what her duties are.
You would think, again, this was poorly set up because they would have known who Pearl Thoreau was. They would have had her credentials.
They would have had her credentials. She would have made it clear what she was interested in, because she also stole the artifacts that were already stolen so that she could study them. She makes this big deal of, I took them to learn, not to sell. It was the only way to continue my studies after Catherine cut me out.
And that didn't really make sense either. I just don't think it was well set up. I could accept a setup like that, but it has to be explained better, because you actually never see Catherine interact with Pearl Thoreau ever. So you only have what Pearl Thoreau says. You don't know how Catherine feels about it. You don't see Catherine ordering Pearl around. And we've seen plenty of this with companions and ladies in Agatha Christie movies. Get my cape, get my fan. Oh, I'm chilled. Oh, I need a glass of ice water. This tea is tepid, heated up. Oh, this tea is too hot. Why don't you cool it off a little bit? You don't get any of that. It's like they're not even in the same room when they are in the same room. So there is no setup for this at all.
It was just a way to lecture the audience about what virtues they wanted to pass along.
It wasn't well set up.
No.
It was not well set up at all. And this really wasn't a mystery. This was more of a romance. You see Agatha at the very beginning saying that she wants to do research into romance, and that was kind of weird too. But then, of course, it sets it up for the novel which she writes, and then she tells her publisher at the end, you are going to publish this novel, but we'll publish it as Mary Westmacott. And the publisher is like, oh, yes, of course. Then we can have two best-selling authors in our stable.
Well, I don't think they expected it to be a best-selling, but it got the book published out of the way. It got it not associated with Agatha Christie, which is what Christie would have, in real life, Christie wanted that in the first place, because the Mary Westmacott pen name allowed her to write about her innermost feelings and experiences without having her name attached.
Yeah, and they weren't mysteries, and they were essentially women's book club fiction is probably the term that we would use today. They were a very different kind of genre, different tropes. An analysis of the human condition is really what she was looking at. And if her name, Agatha Christie, had been on the cover, she couldn't have sold those books successfully, because everybody would have said, this isn't a detective story. This isn't a mystery. Yeah. So her doing them as Mary Westmacott made sense both in terms of the Curse of Ishtar and in terms of her real life. You get sometimes glimpses of the real life of Agatha Christie in this movie, flashes of it. But that's all it is flashes. This is obviously parallel universe, 2 or 3 pages over from the one that
universes over.
2 or 3 universes over from where we are. Because again, when she's having that dinner at the beginning of the movie, when she meets Leonard and Catherine Woolley, nobody asks her about the disappearance. And again, you could have set this up where you see Leonard for just a second before they enter the dining room. Don't talk about that. We've been told not to, because she won't talk about it, and I don't want you irritating her. She's rich, and maybe she'll put some money towards the dig. Anything that would have said why no one ever brought up the 11-day disappearance, which people still talk about today. Almost 100 years ago, and oh my God, it still could be on the cover of People magazine.
Well, we have the 3rd biography of Agatha Christie just out by Lucy Wolseley. It was excerpted in The Guardian, her passage about the disappearance, and in fact, it just showed up, I think, in the Times of London. I just saw a clip from that, and that's all they're interested in talking about, because publicly, that's about the most interesting thing about her.
Yeah, you don't go into The Second Chance at Love with Max Mallowan, and her entire career as a archaeologist's wife doing digs all over the Middle East, and that she must have met a lot of interesting people and did a lot of the boring cataloging and photography and record keeping, all of which has to be done. You see flashes of reality into what is a very odd movie. It was surprisingly funny. It had some surprisingly gruesome moments when the coffin is opened up and you see Lucy contorted and dead. When Max discovers Marmaduke Ponsonby's hand, his rigor mortis hand, still clutching the pearl-handled pistol.
And he takes it to Agatha's room to fire it off, and he still has it wrapped around the hand. It's like, why do you keep that?
Well, he did say, rigor mortis really is strong, and because you can't unclench the fingers, I I guess. This was a very odd movie. It was uneven.
It was very uneven.
It was uneven. It was not tightly scripted enough because they spent too much time telling you what something was supposed to be, but they didn't set it up properly, and then they didn't give you a proper payoff either.
And the music was strange, too. The soundtrack was really off.
Yeah, it was tinkling piano most of the time, except when it wasn't.
It reminded me of Twin Peaks. That kind of dun, dun, only a little more, like you said, more tinkling piano. It was supposed to set a mood.
I don't know that it did. I noticed the soundtrack, and I only notice soundtracks when I don't like them or when they're really perfect. Mm-hmm. And this was not perfect. It was interesting, but I don't think it worked for this movie. The title is very misleading. It is very, very misleading as to what it actually is, because you don't get somebody saying, "Oh my God, the Curse of Ishtar, that's what oil is going to be." I mean, it looks like it's so wonderful and so terrific. Anything! They could have said something, and they didn't. And so you've got this title, The Curse of Ishtar, and you're absolutely sure that there are going to be amulets that allow you to connect with Sumerian gods, but you don't.
This was still better than the Franny Fisher movie.
Oh my
Which
God.
was also, they for some reason decided to try to make it into an Indiana Jones-like travel log, or The Mummy.
And it was awful. It was absolutely awful. I really enjoyed the Franny Fisher TV series, and the movie that they made was stupid. This was so much better, and this still wasn't a very good movie.
It still wasn't very good. I guess we would say we wouldn't recommend watching it.
For completeness sake, if you want... The reason why you're watching this, and we're going to get into this more after we watch the third Agatha Christie as a star movie, is to see Agatha Christie envisioned as a character, as a fictional character, kind of like Conan Doyle solving mysteries with Harry Houdini, where they are real people, but as fictional characters. Not too many real people make the leap into becoming fictional characters. But that certainly seems to be what's happening with Agatha.
We'll go into that later, but she's appeared in a number of books and a number of movies in different ways, and we'll get into that with the third one, Agatha and the Midnight Murders, which we'll see next.
Yeah, we'll see that Wednesday. I'm trying to think if I have anything else to say that's clever or witty about the Curse of Ishtar, and I guess all of my cleverness is lost in sand. It really looked nice, I will certainly say that, and I have to say also that it looked real. Mm-hmm. Almost everything that we saw looked real. The digs looked real, the sets looked real, the archaeological stuff, it looked dirty, it looked dusty, it looked like people sweated, and because we just saw Death on the Nile, the Kenny Branagh, and nothing in that movie looked real. This looked like they were actually out there in the sand. They
were only inhibited in a way because they filmed it in Malta, and that may have been cheaper and certainly a lot easier than trying to film in the Middle East. But we've seen other Christies, Death in Mesopotamia, and
Appointment with Death,
where they filmed at archaeological sites, and it actually looked like they were doing archaeology, because here it almost looked like they were on in a cruise ship.
Yeah, they really weren't necessarily doing archaeology, but at the same time it was sandy and dirty and dusty and hot, and you knew they were actually on location. And it does show to an audience whether you do it in the real world or whether you do it all on green screens in an air-conditioned studio. It really does show.
We'll see a new one next time, and we'll be back again with Agatha Christie, She Watched on Bill Peschel.
And I'm Teresa, and remember that we have published her 6 Agatha Christie novels, fully annotated, to explain the history behind the mystery. And if you want to talk to us about Agatha in person, look at our website, and you'll see our upcoming events.
And we'll see you at the movies.
See you then.
Agatha Christie, She Watched is Teresa Peschel and Bill Peschel. Produced by Bill Peschel. Theme song, Call to Adventure by Kevin MacLeod. New episodes come out every week wherever you stream your content. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can help support us by going to anchor.fm/mystery and leaving a 5-star rating and review, and by helping to spread the word. To advertise on Mystery She Watched, email Peschel at peschelpress.com. All questions and comments can be emailed to Peschel at peschelpress.com. And thank you for listening.